This is why Superman works alone.
Hi folks, welcome to the show. I'm Luke Hector and I'm the Broken Meeple. This is a show devoted to board games where I give reviews, top 10s, and always give my honest opinion regardless of the consequences that might befall me. We'll get on with the top 10 in just a second, but first I want to say a quick word from the sponsor of this channel. As a fellow gamer, you'll understand this is unacceptable. The solution? Head down to my new sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk. KIENDA stocks many of the hot new releases as well as some old hidden gems. Free delivery on orders over £30, further discounts on bulk purchases, and even 5% of your spending refunded back to you as points to be used for further discounts down the line. If you use the referral link in the description below and sign up for a new account, you'll get 5% discount on your first order over £60. So let's make gaps in your collection a thing of the past. Get down to KIENDA and start saving today. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of the video.
Get on with it.
So on today's top 10 we are continuing the previous one out of this series, which is my top 10 two-player games. Not to be coincided with a certain day of the February month. But basically I'm doing 3 videos. One for casual games, one for next step, sort of middle of the road games, and one for advanced games. And surprisingly, the advanced one is proving quite tricky to do, and I thought that would actually be one of the slightly more easier ones, but nope, apparently it's becoming the hardest one to do. But for now we're talking about next step. So what do I mean by next step? That's kind of subjective. But essentially the casual games list was one that you could just just whip out nice and quick, get it done, casual, don't need to worry too much about winning. It's easy for new gamers, easy for anybody to just sort of get in, teach it, whip it out, and you sort of feel relaxed about it. So there's quite a lot of nature themed games there for that reason. But this one is more the case of, right, maybe you'll teach this to a new gamer, but unlikely. It's more that, oh, they're just getting into games, you could throw one of these out, or I want something that makes me have to make decisions and think a bit more, but not have to go out of the way to advanced levels. We don't want these games to take more than, say, an hour, maybe an hour and a quarter of our time, and new gamers might struggle with these a little bit. So it's just kind of like the next bit on. Midweight is not necessarily the word I would use, because there's not a huge amount of games that I would consider midweight for 2 players only. It would just mainly be multiplayer games. Kind of make of it what you will. It's like, look, we're done with casual. I want something that's just gonna test the brain cells that little bit more. As I say, hopefully I've come up with a half decent list of 10 and I'd be interested to know your thoughts. So without further ado, let's get cracking. For my number 10, we are venturing into the world of Mad Max.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
This is a 2-player only game, which I had not played for a long time after it had already been released, but finally decided, you know what, I'm just going to jump into it, see what it's like, see if it's any good, and Radlands turned out to be quite a good, fun game. Not perfect. I do have some issues with the fact that you don't have a lot of cards to play with in that game, but essentially what you're doing is that you have 3 columns of cards that are made up of your various people, like your, I suppose what you call them, road warriors, or your, your survivors. And what you're doing is you're defending these 3 strongholds as part of your base. But the opponent also has these. You're trying to attack their base while also defending your own. But it's done with a clever system of card play, where the cards have got multiple uses with gorgeous artwork. That's kind of a sort of almost a psychedelic neon style Mad Maxy type thing. It's kind of weird to describe, but it really does look gorgeous on the table, although it is a bit annoying that you have to buy a playmat and various other big things from them separately for more cash. But the advantages of not having them is that you do have a very nice small box to contain this with. So it's kind of what do you want, really? Do you want less, do you want more, take up more storage space but have more of an ease when playing it, or do you want it to take up less storage space but maybe just have to put up with the fact that you've got to organize these columns? But it's a cool game, but it does have one too many rules to make it casual. There's certainly a little bit of thinkiness, a lot of tactics going on, and just that bit too much for me to say, oh yeah, you're brand new to games? Boom! Radlands it is. No, it's not going to happen. But I've enjoyed my time with this one. It doesn't hit the table very often, hence it's down really at number 10. But this is a pretty solid game that's worth checking out. I haven't really heard many people say anything bad about it, but it's, I'm gonna say, it's good fun. It sits on my shelf, barely takes up about as much space as this, frankly. It's really quite a small thin box when you say about it. And other than the fact that I just wish you drew more cards each turn, that's a minor blemish. It's just part of the game. But yeah, it's pretty good tactical game, and you even get different bases that you can kind of combine and draft at the start of the game to make it a little bit more varied. And I highly recommend you do that even for your first game, because I'm not convinced the starting locations are entirely balanced. But that's a small thing. It would only affect your first game if you use them anyway. So yeah, Radlands. My number 9, I actually had to let go, I think, unless I can find it downstairs somewhere, mainly because the person who wanted it needed it more than I did, but I still think this is a really solid game, and it's the newest one that I've actually looked at, mainly because I looked at it this year. Yeah, this was a 2023 review for a game that came out at Essen called Beer and Bread. This is a head-to-head game where each of you is, well, as the title suggests, making beer and bread. But the idea is that you're trying to make different types of beer and bread for set collection, like more points, but the cards that you play have multiple uses, and it depends what season it is. Half the game you're playing cards where you play a card for one of 3 different uses, then exchange hands with the other player, and then rinse repeat till the round ends. But then in a different season, you effectively sort of have your hand of cards to yourself, but you can exchange them with a communal pile. It's really cool how that system works. And as for the multiple uses, well, you can either use it to make the beer and bread, use it to gain resources, or upgrade your farm with various different abilities like increasing your storage or getting you free resources. And all the resources come from a central display where it's used by both players, so you can't rely on them always being there. And I quite like the little twist in the storage mechanism where, I mean, I do have a problem with storage mechanisms in a lot of games, but I like the idea with this one that if you gain too much and you can't store it, you have to offer it to your opponent first before it goes out of play. That's quite cool, and I don't see a lot of games do this, and I think this should actually be in more games where you have to store resources, because it doesn't make sense that they would go to waste. You'd think there'd be something in play that says, oh, I can give it to the other person. And in this, it kind of makes sense with the setting, because the idea is that you are on the same kind of farm area, but you're not necessarily against each other. You're trying to best each other in terms of making beer and bread, but you don't hate each other's guts. So it's fine if you want to give somebody a bit of barley or some hops. But this is well produced, not that difficult to learn. It was a surprise hit at Essen, and the publisher actually gave out free beer, which I found quite cool. I mean, as an advertising habit, that's a good way to get me interested. You know, just give me free beer.
Drink?
I'm joking, yeah, it's not that you don't buy my opinion with beer. But yeah, that's the first I've ever seen anyone do that, so I just thought that was quite a cool gimmick. But this game is actually pretty solid. Check out my video review for more details, but honestly, give this one a look if you want a 2-player farming game, and, you know, there's not many of them around. My number 8 is a word game, and I do like word games, but I tend to struggle with them more. I'm more a numbers person. I'm a tax accountant after all, and I was really good at maths. But the problem is that back in, you know, English literature, we read dire rubbish like Pride and Prejudice. Yeah, I know, get off my case. But also, I wasn't a big fan of English language, and even as a child, you know, back in primary school, I had a language disorder, so I couldn't quite interpret language properly, particularly body language. So there were various things that have hindered my development of, you know, speaking language over the course of time. Thankfully, got over the worst of it. But yeah, I do struggle with, you know, not necessarily spelling, but trying to formulate words quickly is a little bit more tricky for me.
Dog, pig, dog, pig, dog, pig, pig, dog, loaf of bread, system error.
Paperback requires you to kind of do this. It's a deck builder, which I love deck builders, but you can play as multiplayer, but honestly, you're pretty much just playing it with 2 because it just elongates the time when you add more players. But I like the idea that with the hand of letters you've got, you're trying to spell out words to gain money, which you then use to buy cards with letters and abilities on them. So if I play against somebody who's really good at spelling and formulating words, I can probably be better at the deck building, combo building side of it. So we can sort of be on a level playing field, but for different reasons. But even then, it's quite a good teaching tool to actually help you spell words better. I mean, things like Wordcraft and Word on the Street and a few other ones like that are good for the similar reason. But this one I just like because it's such a cool, innovative idea. A deck builder spelling game. We wouldn't think those two would go together, but somehow this one just does. It comes in a pretty decent box, although I would have preferred it if it came in a sort of normal, you know, tub box rather than one of those boxes with the lid on top. It's like, I can get a little bit fiddly, but it's a cool game and I still enjoy it and I still have it. I believe, down there. Yeah, in fact, yeah, it's on my shelf. So I still, you know, put my money where my mouth is. I still own this game, but I don't tend to get it out very often. But then again, I could say that about most two-player games. But still enjoy this one and still recommend it if you're a word game fan. For my number 7, we are returning to Cosmos games. I put one on the list last time, I got one on the list this time. But this one is revered by a lot of people who enjoy two-player games, and you know, very rarely is a bad word said about it. I do like this game. Maybe don't love it, but I still think it's really solid, like I said, enough to put on this list. And that is a really cool little game that most people have not really played, I suspect, called Targi. Yeah, this has got the expansion in it as well, which granted I haven't had a chance to really get to grips with it because this doesn't hit the table as much. But the idea with this one is that it's a cool sort of worker placement for two, which you wouldn't normally get. This one has a grid of cards where you're trying to get the cards that are within this grid, but each of you has 2 workers that you place on these outside cards for various bonuses. But then what happens is at the end of a worker placement round, the intersection of these workers are the cards that you get. But yeah, block spaces, you block rows and columns. So if I put one down and I'm thinking about going down this column, you might put your worker down on a row that blocks me from the card I want, or you might go somewhere else. It's like, but now I can't go there, so what card can I get next? Very simple, and yet done with 2 workers and 2 players. Pretty impressive. And then you're just getting cards for either abilities or resources, and the rest of it is kind of standard affair. But the tension with those 2 workers is really good. The rules are not complicated. It's beige. I mean, it's a lot of beige and a fairly colorless game. But there's just something about that mechanic with the 2 workers. It makes the game. If that's not interesting to you, then you're not going to enjoy this game, because the rest of it is kind of part and parcel for the course. But this is the idea that if you like worker placement and you think, well, most games with worker placement need the full count of players, this one doesn't. It's just 2, and it does the job nicely. Not to say that the rest of the whole collecting sets of cards and managing the resources and that and getting tribe special abilities is not fun. It is all fun. But a lot of it does ride on that worker placement mechanic, so I'll leave you to make your own decisions on that. The expansion does add some more stuff as well. I hear that there's another thing they're doing for it. I forget what's happening. I'm fairly certain something else was announced for this, and it really isn't needed. I think it's got plenty enough in the box as it is. But even if you don't get the expansion, it's not necessary. But I feel that if you get the expansion, it may be one that you want to just keep on using, because I think it replaces some of this stuff in the game. But either way, grab yourself a copy of Targi and see what you think. My number 6, you probably wouldn't have expected on this list, and to be honest, I did contemplate putting this on the advanced list. It really does depend on how much you've expanded this game, really, and also how you play it, because you can play it with drafting or you can play it without, so that makes a difference. This is a multiplayer game, but honestly, if I can play it with 2, I'll love to play it with 2, because adding more players mainly just adds more time to the game, but I still enjoy this game regardless. But this one, Seasons, is a game that does not get enough buzz anymore. I think it used to be really popular back around the 2013, 14, 15 time, I think, when it was first released. No, was it 2012, I think. But back in the early times when board gaming was at its peak. Yeah, board gaming has not peaked at all in recent years compared to what 2012 area was. That was the peak of board gaming.
I beg to differ, sir.
Seasons is this great kind of card tableau game where you have 3 rounds of the game, but the rounds are on a timer based on what players do. So you draft dice each round, and these dice give you mana in order to play cards with special abilities and comborific powers to get points and other mana and all sorts. But the rounds are divided into seasons, each with 3 segments, and the seasons dictate which dice you throw. And yes, I do like those dice. Those dice I rather good. I'm gonna hold myself from rolling them at this point.
You're not sleeping with it, are you, Ray?
Because A, I don't really want to delay this video much anymore, and B, I can't remember where I stored the seasons box. I think it's all the way downstairs. So you're safe for now, but these dice are great. And I like the fact that when you go to the different seasons, different dice appear, but the timer is dependent on which die is left in the draft, and I love that in all drafting games, the idea that the last thing that doesn't get taken has some impact on the whole game. Take that die, or you know, and the thing barely moves and you're still stuck in winter, or take the other die and you end up fast forwarding all the way to spring. It's just a cool concept. The cards you play, also great, you know, they've all got different special abilities. I think you only have 2 copies of each card in the deck, so there's a lot of variation in there. There's different strategies to do. Now, this could go to advanced if you expand this with both expansions and throw all that stuff in, because then it probably crosses a threshold. For me, I don't tend to throw in a lot of the stuff the expansions has, except for the cards themselves. You know, the whole Die of Destiny thing and those special abilities you can have at the start of the game and stuff, I'm like, nah, don't really care. But I get the 2 expansions for seasons just to get all those cards, shove them into a deck, one big deck, shuffle it all together and just go. You know, basically playing epic seasons. That works great for me and could still keep the game at a next step level, but it might be tilting a line at that point. But if you can just get yourself the base game of seasons, you'll still have good fun, and it will definitely be considered a next step game, because the rules themselves aren't particularly complex. It's more the tactical nature of dealing with the cards and trying to juggle your mana around. But it's a really solid game. I love this one. It frequently has entered my top 100. I think it's always been in my top 100, possibly even my top 50 for several years. It really is a solid game, and yet I don't know if you can get it anymore because I haven't seen it in shops, but if you do manage to find one second hand, you're doing well. So Seasons, give it a shot. My number 5, I think I mentioned briefly on the last video when I was talking about another small deck building game. This is one of my favorite deck builders. In fact, for a while I think it was my favorite deck builder. I don't know if it still is now, but I still love playing this when I can, and it really is best played at 2. Solo doesn't really work with this, and 3 and 4 players just really elongates the game a lot. But if you can play this with 2, max 3, but preferably at 2, Valley of the Kings is a solid deck building game. And if you don't have to get the premium version either. If you get the premium version, you get all the expansions and great artwork and tarot cards, great. But there's also more storage, and the graphic design isn't as good as it used to be. But if you can get one of those little boxes, of which I've still kept mine, I've still kept my little boxes because they're great for travel, then it's a really, really compact yet great game. One of those great bang for your buck style games. The idea with this one being that you're collecting sets of these cards to bury in your tomb, and they come from this crumbling pyramid. So you have to buy at the bottom, and the whole thing crumbles down, and that gives you access to the cards. Standard multi-use card affair. Some cards give you monetary value, but they can also be used for a special ability, or you can stick them in your tomb. You know, again, I love multi-use. But the twist with this game is the fact that the only thing you score is the sets in your tomb. Anything in your deck doesn't count diddly squat. So you have to make a decision during the game, as this pyramid is basically a running timer, where, hang on a minute, when do I actually start putting stuff in my tomb? How early? Which card should I put there? Because if I put this card in my tomb, I score for its set, but then I don't get the funky ability it has. But you're going to make that decision at some point, and depending on how many cards you've got that let you entomb cards, you might have to make that decision sooner rather than later. It's just a cool twist, again. Twist on a deck building mechanic. It's something different and unique, and to be fair, this was an earlier deck builder, so this one got that thing right of trying something different before deck builders were suddenly a dime a dozen. It's a really cool game. If you're going to get one of the little boxes, I highly recommend you get the Last Rites one. It's the 3rd in the series. Get that one first, because the starter cards in it are better than the original starter cards. Otherwise, like I say, if you can find one, then they'll all be fine. It's not like the original starter cards suck, but definitely the revised ones are better. And if you must get the premium set and you're willing to spend the cash, then by all means do it. It still looks nice and it's a great game. But either way, you'll still preferably want to play this at 2. Well, we ain't done with deck builders. In fact, this one, if it carries on at this rate, this could be my favorite deck builder. It's certainly been rising up my rankings in my top 100, but the more I play this game, the more I enjoy it. And yes, it can be played 2, 3, or 4 players. And maybe you could say that 3 player is a good sweet spot for this, but 4 players is definitely elongating the length of this game too much, but I still enjoy it. 2 players though, perfect. Nippy, zippy, quick turns, still that same gameplay, and this is the first deck builder that I actually think does its theme justice. This is Fort from later games, and this is my favorite game they've produced. Yeah, sorry all you Root fans.
I'll give you a piece of shit.
I'm okay with Root. It's an average game for me, maybe above average, but I don't go mad on Root like everyone else does. But they made a deck builder called Fort. This is my choice of game from them so far because it is basically like American kids on recess, or break time, whatever we call it. Here we call it break time, you call it recess. And the idea is that they're kids building a fort. Think like the whole South Park type thing. And what it is that all the cards are kids and they've all got special abilities, public and private. The private you do for yourself, the public abilities other players can follow, but they've all got suits. And so when you play an action, you can boost it with other cards in your hand of the same suit to make it more powerful, and other players can follow by playing a card of the same suit. That's fairly standard stuff, although it is quite a cool system. But again, twist, and this really works into the theme. You only play one card and any boost during a turn. So the cards that you don't play out of your hand go face up in front of your player board as in the yard, it's called. And it means that when at the end of your turn you have to recruit a card, you can recruit from a communal display or another person's yard. Yes, if you don't use the cards in your deck, they are up for grabs by other players. If you don't play with the kid has a hissy fit and defects to the other side.
Will you guys? I'm going home.
It thematically works, and then you get the mini expansion dogs and cats, and they work. You've got a dog, cool ability, meet the condition, the dog will go in your kennel for, for more points. But if you don't play with the dog, they go to the neighbour's discard pile at the end. Again, because the dog wants attention. The cat's fantastic. Cat gives you a little ability and some scoring at the end, but you have to fulfill a condition of cards in your yard to get the cat. And as soon as you meet the condition, cat comes to you. But as soon as anybody else later on meets the same condition, they get the cat. And the cat just keeps going back and forth between players because cats are fickle and they just do that. The theme of a deck builder, and it works. Very few, if any, other deck builders are able to replicate theme so well as this does. But it's not just the theme that makes me love this game. Mechanically, it's good fun. It's not complicated, some people struggle with the iconography at first, but you've got a perfect reference aid and everything you need is on that reference aid, and it's not the most complicated game anyway rules-wise. It's just a bit different from other deck builders, which makes it unique, makes it fun, but also might confuse a few players, hence I would never want to put this as a casual game. This is most certainly a next step game. Like, you've played Dominion, you've played Star Realms, alright, now try Fort. But man, 2 players, back and forth, zippy turns, you've still got the opponent's yard to play from, and it just becomes a much more sinister head-to-head game. I love this deck builder. Every time I play it, it gets better and better for me, and I can't wait to see if there's more content, like another mini expansion down the works, with different kid cards, maybe interchangeable suits. That'd be pretty sweet, but honestly, even if they don't, I've got the perfect box with cats and dogs at me, and honestly, if you've not tried Fort, give it a shot. I will teach you at a convention because it most certainly goes in my game bag all the time because it's a relatively small box. I love it and I will teach you it if you see me. So, Fort, great game. For my number 3, I am taking a look down there on a shelf full of motley collection of games. I think this is the only game I own from this publisher, but it's definitely my favourite, although it is a reprint of an older game. But they did such a good job making this look stark and colourful and really vibrant on the table, with what is a fairly minimalistic looking game. I'd never played the original, but as soon as I tried this one, I was like, yeah, this is great. I did try it at 5 players though, and that was a mistake, because this game really needs to be capped at 3. But if you play it with 2, it works brilliantly, even solo in fact. That is On the Underground. On the Underground is a metro building game where you can be in London or Germany, and finally we might actually get 2 more maps soon. How long's it been since this game's been out and you haven't given us 1 expansion yet? Hurry up and bring out Paris and New York pronto. I want it. I will buy it the second it comes out, alright? Jesus, I'm giving you my money. But this is a metro building game where you are building networks of train networks on this map which replicate the actual metro systems, but there's a lazy passenger. Although I hate to call it lazy because you can make it a lazy person, but you can also make it a disabled person or an old man. It gets a little bit controversial if you call it lazy at that point, but they're basically a passenger who wants to do the least amount of walking to get from A to B, and their destinations keep changing every turn. But what happens is that they will take the route from A to B that requires the least walking, so they're going to go on as many route connections as possible if it means they haven't got to walk there. Doesn't matter how elongated the route is, as long as they just get to sit down and watch the world go by, they're fine. And so what you're doing each turn is you are building up your various networks to try and get the passenger to ride your network as often as possible. And that's pretty much it. You connect up to various other spots on the board for some bonus points, but for the most part, you've got several networks, and in 2 players you can build, I think, 4 different color networks, so you've got a lot of choice of where to build out. But it's quick turns, nice and zippy. I mean, you know, it's relatively straightforward to figure out where the person's going to go. And then on your turn, you got 4 action points, spend them putting down tracks, next player, then back to you, next player. It just works really well. Now, it's got a brilliant solo mode if you get the mini expansion, that's the thing. And 3 players, this game still works. But I had to put it on this list as a 2-player game because next step, definitely, because I think for new players they might struggle a bit with making that passenger move around and get the tactics of the game. But next step for certain. But 2 players is just nice and fast. You get the same enjoyment. You don't lose anything from having multiple players. And I really enjoy not just the simple smoothness of this game combined with the cool thing of trying to figure out, right, okay, it's like a different puzzle is introduced to you every turn. On your turn, you're like, right, passenger's going to move from there to there, but if I put this network here, then it's probably he's going to take that route instead, which then means he uses mine and uses his and then goes down that way. Okay, fine. But if I put these 3 down there, he'll only use mine once, but then he goes over to that end of the map, which means he's then going to go to that destination next. I could make good use of that. And this is a line of thinking you have each turn. And because the destinations keep changing, you are given effectively a new puzzle every turn, and it just makes it great fun. I really like this game, and it doesn't get anywhere near the amount of buzz it should do. And partially that is possibly because they didn't correct the player count scaling from the old version, which also meant that the game wasn't particularly good at 4 and 5 players. So this is basically a 2 to 3 player game, but I highly recommend it for 2, preferably. So if it's just you and your spouse, give this one a look. For my number 2, you had to have called this one. You had to have known I would put this on the list. In no way, shape or form is this casual, although I did contemplate whether this should go in advanced, but I think that because I have this category, I think it can be moved back 1 to a next step game. But this is definitely one that can get complex quite quickly if you throw in expansions and stuff like that. But I think this, for an abstract card game, is just a wonderful experience. No theme whatsoever, despite the fact it tries to throw technology trees at you. But for puzzles and just like cool combo building and like really fulfilling turns, innovation is just a fantastic game. I've pretty much never played it at 4-player team mode, and I'm not even sure if it would even work at that, although put me in the comments if you've played 4-player innovation in team mode. Let me know if that's any good or not. You know, difficulties and what went well. But this is primarily a 2-player game. And back and forth with these technologies that you play out that have cool powers that you trigger. You've got 5 different colors, so you can have 5 of them out, you know, face up. But the different abilities let you, you know, tuck them under piles, you know, recycle them, go back technologies, go forward. But also splay the cards, which means that these little symbols that you have on the cards, you know, you don't see many of them when it's just one deck. But as soon as you can splay the cards out, you start seeing all the other symbols and they power your various actions. And then on top, the actions are a mix of either co-op or whatever is competitive. I'm not sure what the word they use is. And basically the co-op ones means that your opponent can also join in the ability if they have the same number of symbols, whereas the competitive one is you're going to do something bad unless you have more than I do. And so there's a good amount of interaction between the 2 of you, and I've had some belter games of this. I mean, I won't go into too much detail, but you know, there was one game where I was on the back foot. You're supposed to dominate each age. So, you know, when you've got a certain amount of points, you can dominate ages, and if you do it so often, you get the victory. There's multiple ways to win, that's the other thing. Domination, points at the end if you draw past age 10, or automatic victory from certain cards. But I was on the back foot on a board game arena session where I like 5 dominations to 1 or something. I was like, next domination they get, they're gonna win. And for the whole game, I was able to stretch it out by going, no, not letting you get it. I can fight you for it. We're gonna go to different ages and not gain a nomination. And then by the end, I was able to rig it so that we drew past age 10, because as soon as that happens, the game ends and you count up points. And literally on the last turn, I was able to swing it so that I was 2 points ahead of the guy by drawing past age 10 and triggering another ability. As a result, I didn't care if he had 5 dominations to my 1, I still won. I felt so smug. It's unbelievable. I'm glad there was no webcam at the time, because I think it might have ticked him off if I'd done that.
Ah, smug mode.
But this game creates opportunities like that. Yeah, there's no theme really. This is purely an abstract card game. But man, it is a wonderful abstract card game. I love this. If I get a chance to play it, I will play it. I played this 40 times or so during lockdown because it was essentially one of the easiest things I could whip out on Board Game Arena. This game is just such a blast, and I really want to add more expansions to it, but once you go past Echoes of the Past, it gets a little bit fiddly and time consuming for its own good, and not to mention that if you're playing this with someone new, it's going to take him a while to learn it, hence this is a next step game minimal. I was always tempted to put this on advanced, but seriously, give this one a try. And my number 1, of course you have called this. If you have not figured out that this would be my number 1, then shame on you. And shame on Tom Vassell, because when they did their 2-player games, they only did casual and advanced, and Tom got a lot of shtick from putting this game on the casual list, because it is not a casual game, people. This is a next step game. Although, to be fair, I actually should kill more shame on the people, because I can get if one person decides, oh yeah, this is a a casual game, even though it's not. The fact that it was number 1 on the people's choice as well is just ridiculous.
I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
How you gamers think that this is a casual, new player friendly game is beyond comprehension, okay? This is just a classic example of how gamers skew the weight of games. Of course, I'm talking about the brilliant Seven Wonders Duel. This is a fantastic 2-player implementation of one of my favorite drafting games. Now, in the original Seven Wonders, the drafting 2-player variant sucks. You use a dummy player, it barely works, what's the point, don't use it. So unlike Splendor Duel on the previous list, this one definitely was needed for a 2-player experience. But I can even play it solo with the print and play expansion. Look on the Repos Production website, I think you might be able to find it still. Very minimalistic expansion. But 2 players, wow. Victory conditions of points, but also 2 automatic ones. So go for points over 3 ages, or you win by automatic science victory, get all the symbols, or win by automatic military victory by pushing your armor token up to their end. But the idea that you've got this kind of open drafting system where the cards are laid out face up and face down in a various pattern, and so you draft from those, but you can only draft visible cards from the bottom. So you're sort of thinking, well, if I take this card, the opponent could take that one. How do I do this? Throw in Pantheon, and you end up changing the tempo by saying, well, you know what, I'm going to spend money and trigger this awesome god power, and then I don't have to take a card. So you upset the back and forth with that expansion, and honestly, if you can get Pantheon, I highly, highly recommend it. Definitely takes it into next step at that territory. Agora, you can skip. Agora's fiddly, it's not particularly that interesting. I thought it was okay, but I would not recommend playing both expansions at the same time, and honestly, if you're only going to pick one expansion, you pick Pantheon, not Agora. So, Agora just wasn't needed. That was a bit of a waste of an expansion, but Pantheon with Seven Wonders Duel is just pitch perfect. But even normal Seven Wonders Duel, even without any expansions, is still fantastic. It's still like top 50 worthy for me. But with Pantheon, it was top 10 worthy for me. It's that much of a swing. But this is not a casual game, people. I mean, you've got to deal with the different wonders. You've got to deal with all these different card colors. You've got to deal with all the iconography. You've got to deal with 3 different victory conditions. You've got to deal with trading from opponents and how that can get reduced. There's just too much in this game to consider it casual. And when I'm playing Seven Wonders Duel, I'm not playing it in a casual state. I'm thinking and planning ahead about all these different cards I can take, and I'm on the edge of my seat, particularly in Age 3, where I'm like, gotta get it to points, gotta get it to points, stop them getting that 7th science symbol, find out, please don't let that card be a science symbol. It's okay, right, come on, get to the end, get to the end. That's not casual, people. So anyway, I could rant about that all day, but all I'm saying is that if you enjoy Seven Wonders, but you know that, I wish I could play it with 2 players, and you haven't taken a chance with Seven Wonders Duel yet, You owe it to yourselves to do so. It is that good. I cannot recommend this game enough. It is easily my favorite two-player game of all time, I think. Ugh, I don't know, Spirit Island? Although I play Spirit Island mostly solo, whereas this one I play mostly two-player. So I suppose tomato on that one. But it's definitely like top 10 worthy two-player game. It's one of the absolute best, one of probably Bruno Cathaler's best work. Although he did design it in combination with Antoine Balzar. So yeah, between the two of them, their best work. I can't say enough good stuff about this game. It's probably the best two-player game that will be on these free lists. We'll have to see. But yeah, by all means, check it out. But it's not casual.
Everybody got that?
Whew. There we go, another 10 two-player games that I highly recommend to you. And again, not necessarily two-player only. Multiplayer games that are best at two can also feature, because if I restricted it just to two-player only, getting 30 games I'd recommend would probably be a little bit more tricky. But, it doesn't matter if it's two-player only. If you're going to buy a game but it's best with two, then buy it and play it with two. What's the big deal? But yeah, we've done, 20 games now, and hopefully you've enjoyed them. Now, I do have some honourable mentions, so I will mention a few. Whoop, get my fingerprint recognition. Got a new phone. So, honourable mentions. Agricola, All Creatures, Big and Small. Now, I do enjoy this game. I still think it's really cool. Like, building up little pens and animals. And certainly, I'd rather play this version than Agricola normal. But then I'd also rather play Converted than Agricola. But it's decent. It would be in my teens. But Beer and Bread, I think, probably is a little bit more fun than it. This one has a bit more rules to it. But it's still a really solid game. War Chest. I got rid of War Chest eventually because it just really wasn't hitting the table, and it's a bag building kind of abstract war game where you've got these different pieces, they got different movement rules, and when you draw them out of the bag you can use them in different ways. It's a neat game and it's really well produced, and I still recommend it, but it got a little bit hard to teach this to people. It's not an easy game to get into, and you really want to play this with a repeat person all the time. Team mode just takes too long, and it just really didn't suit my circumstances more than anything else. But I did a review of it and I gave it like a max 10 rating at the time. Probably closer to an 8 now as time has gone by, but it's still a good game. Alright, The King is Dead. Oh my god, talk about a game that I didn't expect to like at all and probably shouldn't like. But this game has wowed me, and it's on my shelf downstairs with the Osprey game collection. But you can play this with 2, 3 or 4. 3 is great, 2 is probably greater, but yeah, I can take it or leave it with the player count. And yeah, this would probably be in my 11 to 15. It's just an abstract area control game. You play a card, it does some little ability, and you push cubes around a map of England in order to control areas. Sounds pretty dull, but the tension of the limited amount of cards you have for the whole game and trying to control different areas and go for one of 2 different victory conditions. I've done a review of it, and you're better off watching my video to explain it in better detail, but it's a solid game and I never expected I would like it. Sniper Elite, down there, right by On the Underground in fact. 1v1 works best in my opinion. I mean, you can add more players, but that basically just means there's a discussion with the German side. But playing it 1v1 with the hidden movement, where you have 1 sniper and 1 German controlling all the different officers, that's pretty sweet actually. I quite like it to play it that way, but it just didn't quite make top 10 material, and I suppose it's not the cheapest game in the world either, but it's still good fun, still really enjoy it. Rivals of Catan, smallish game, haven't played it in years, but I remember this being a really cool 2-player spin-off on Catan, nice and straightforward. Sadly, I couldn't get a lot of other people to, I tried to play it with some ex-girlfriends of the past, and they couldn't really understand it or get into it, but I still really enjoyed this one. Haven by Ryan Lockett, an interesting game. Haven't played it enough to really know where it sits, and I can't even remember a lot of it. I mean, you're area controlling these parts of a map, but you've got these different beasts that you've got to fight, but you're playing a kind of tug of war thing with your your creatures that you play on your side versus the opponent. To be honest, it's been a while since I've played it and I can't fully remember it, but I do remember enjoying it, and it looks gorgeous because it's got Ryan Lockett's artwork on it, but I don't think he designed it. It's a Red Raven game, but it's a different designer, but it's got that aesthetic all over it, so it does look beautiful. And then finally, finally Sobek. Sobek, Bruno Cathaler, I think it's on the shelf downstairs. Really enjoyed it. I did a video review for this one as well. Just not quite top 10 worthy, but definitely a fun game, one that I was wanting to play for ages because I heard Z Garcia talk about it a lot, you know, collecting the different goods and selling them off, but with some other abilities and, you know, stuff to work out as well. It's a neat game, but for more details, check out my review. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, please thumb it up on YouTube and share it out on social media, pop it in a few Facebook groups and spread the word, you know, and let people know of these great games. You can also help me on the Patreon campaign by supporting the channel and keeping it going, because this is not my day job, this is just a hobby, and so it's got to fund itself somehow. So I thank all my Patreons every time I do another video, because the channel wouldn't be here without them. But also check and put your comments down below. I'd like to hear your thoughts on these games, your honorable mentions. Are there some other games that you think should have made this list? Bear in mind, this is next step midweight games, so think carefully about whether it could be casual or advanced. But again, I'd like to know your thoughts, particularly for the one I was on about earlier, about team play innovation. What were your thoughts on that from anybody who's an innovation fan? Until next time, you can check out more content on the show, including the recent top 10, well, the 2-player casual games list. I mean, why not check that one out first? But also check out the other podcast episode I did, where I go on a bit of a rant about why the Board Game Geek rating system is, kind of broken. As I say, rants incoming on that one, but, you know, agree or disagree, it'd be cool to know your thoughts. Take care, and remember as always, regardless of whether you like to play with 2 or not, it's still only a game. Bye for now.